Welcome to Saroyan on Screen, a year-long look at the films based on the work of William Saroyan. William Saroyan was a massive figure in popular culture from the mid-1930s until his death in 1981. He was known as a writer of short stories first, then as a playwright, novelist, and memoirist. Lesser known were his forays into painting, songwriting, and screenplays. His works brought to life the Armenian-American immigrant experience. His parents had immigrated from Beatles, with stops in New York, Fresno, and eventually settling in San Jose. Saroyan's father, Armagnac, died there in 1911, and Saroyan was sent to the Fred Finch Orphanage in Oakland, California. His mother took him back 5 years later and moved the family to Fresno, where William had been born. Saroyan would sell his first stories at the end of the 1920s, but was irregularly published until 1934, when Story magazine published The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze. This appeared in their February 1934 issue. The story would serve as the starting point for his first collection, The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze and Other Stories, which sold well. He followed that up with 7 more collections before the start of World War II. His first play, His Heart's in the Highlands, came to Broadway in 1939, and was a fair success. It was his second play, The Time of Your Life, that cemented him as a Broadway legend. He won the Pulitzer Prize and the New York Drama Critics Award for the play, and was later turned into a film, which we'll be talking about in a future episode. His first 2 films share an origin story. The hero, of course, is William Saroyan, and the villain is, well, might be, Louis B. Mayer. Mayer was one of the 3 producers who combined to form MGM, or Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Despite being listed last, Mayer is often seen as the driving force behind MGM's development into the prestige studio that all other American studios have aspired to be. Mayer assembled an incredible production team, including legendary Hollywood figures like Irving Thalberg, Bud Schulberg, and Joe Schenck. Not to mention talents like Busby Berkeley, King Vidor, Victor Fleming, and Clarence Brown. Remember that last name for a future episode. At the end of the 1930s and the start of the 1940s, Saroyan was one of the hottest figures in the literary scene. Even before The Daring Young Man was a massive success, he had been in and around Hollywood looking to work as a screenwriter. After his star exploded, he quickly got in touch with major figures at the studios, including Mayer and Schulberg, who he was in correspondence with starting in 1936. He had tried to get work with him in 1934, but that didn't seem to go anywhere. By the early 1940s, following Saroyan's success on Broadway, the studio seemed to be ready, but was Saroyan? Following a trip down to Southern California to see productions of his play Jim Dandy at the Pasadena Playhouse, Saroyan took a room at the Knickerbocker Hotel and contacted Louis B. Mayer. He said that he was interested in giving Mayer one of his plays to produce for the screen. But Mayer was seldomly free, and Saroyan ended up leaving messages for him time and again. Saroyan did not let that stop him from enjoying Hollywood. He made a date with an actress, Phyllis Brooks, and she introduced him to the Hollywood party scene. Brooks was one of the best-known partiers in Hollywood at the time, and introduced Saroyan all over town. Saroyan already had some Tinseltown friends, notably the legend Stanley Rose, but Brooks brought him more fully into the fold. On the professional front, Saroyan tried to get a Hollywood agent, approaching Chuck Daggett and Ben Medford, though neither of them took him on. Instead, Stanley Rose would represent him to a degree. One day, Saroyan made the very Saroyan-like decision to simply head over to MGM and take a look around, hoping to meet Mayer. Of course, Mayer wasn't there, but he did meet Arthur Freed, legendary lyricist and film producer. He was already a fan of Saroyan's and had encountered him on the late-night party scene. He also saw several of MGM's most important figures. Director George Cukor, who had directed the Philadelphia Story. Acting coach Stella Adler, and producer Bernie Hyman, who thought Saroyan would be good at helping to improve scripts and scenarios for the screen. On this initial visit, he also met Eddie Mannix, Mayer's fixer, who was used to keep the wheels of the studio turning freely. Mannix liked Saroyan, and since Mannix was Saroyan's right-hand man, he cleared the path for Saroyan's introduction to Mayer. Saroyan gave Hyman and Freed the script for one of his new works, Afton Water. They passed on it. He also had gotten a slot on Mayer's calendar, but that ended up cancelled. Saroyan felt this was MGM giving him the final brush-off, and Saroyan was hot at Stanley Rose for that. Saroyan had him go to fetch back the script to Afton Waters, and when Rose was there, he was told that Mayer had not wanted to cancel the meeting, merely to reschedule it. That, of course, changed everything. Bill had been thinking about skipping town, but instead he stuck around, and on December 1st, 1941, Saroyan met Louis B. Mayer in his office. In his journal, Saroyan wrote, "Had session with Louis B. Mayer this afternoon. Looks okay. Begin immediately. Sort of trust and gamble deal." Mayer wanted to hire Saroyan to the legendary writers' pool, the group of screenwriters at MGM behind dozens of the greatest films ever made, including significant figures such as Anita Loos. Saroyan would have none of that. He wanted to be a major player. Like with his plays, he wanted to write, direct, and produce. Mayer hadn't become arguably the most powerful man in Hollywood by taking a lot of chances, and Saroyan at that time would have been a sure thing as a writer, but as a director and producer could be more dicey. Mayer made Saroyan an offer. Come on board for a test drive, a few weeks at the studio working and trying out his ideas, in exchange for $300 a week expense account. This was an offer Saroyan could not refuse. He celebrated a bit on December 2nd. Now that he had a certain source of money, he moved from the Knickerbocker to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel at the rate of $200 a month. He went to his office, a temporary space, and got scripts for various one-act plays. After his first day, he headed out on the town. Supper at Manelli's with Gene Kelly and Betsy Blair and Marion. Okay. Home at 1 a.m. Marion likely refers to Marion Davies. Saroyan spent his time on the MGM lot basically busying himself with visits to various productions, drinking with Hyman, Rose, and going to parties, and occasionally gambling with the likes of Nick the Greek. He did find himself small chunks of valuable work. After seeing an early edit of Freed's Panama Hattie, he was asked if he could fix it. Though it's unclear how much Saroyan worked on it, he did take a shot, and the film was famously re-edited and reshots in the month following. He was kind of lost, but did try and get the idea of what it meant to make a picture. He spent several days visiting the set of Victor Fleming's Tortilla Flat, based on the book by Saroyan's friend, John Steinbeck. He knew he wanted to create his own film, and that meant writing a scenario. In his journal, he noted, "I think I'd better write a regular play and then have a movie writer break it down for me into scenario form. Then I will break it down or fill it out the way it should be, and then film it." He did have a problem. He couldn't write in Hollywood. The party scene seemed to call too loudly to ignore. He needed to go home to San Francisco for the holidays, and then he could start writing. So, on December 18th, 1941, his cousin, Ross Bagdasarian, arrived and drove him first to Fresno, and then to San Francisco. "I am here for Christmas and New Year's," Saroyan noted in his journal, "but mainly to write a movie story, or a play which can be adapted into a movie. This I myself am to produce and direct at Metro, if they like it, and of course they may not, which will mean a great opportunity muff." Over the course of a few weeks, he created the story for a film that centered around a bike messenger and his family during World War II. The first reference to his actually writing the piece was in his journal on December 29th, 1941. Working along on the movie story, but a few inner setbacks. He found that he was having some difficulties even in San Francisco, where he had written his most important works. "First, I am going to examine the unfinished plays to see if there are any more pieces I want to salvage. Then, of course, the writing of the motion picture scenario. That's still ahead. The most important new project of all. This is something I have no intention of letting get away from me because of laziness." Despite that note, for the next several days he spent a lot of time writing letters, more than 20, and several journal pages, as well as many poems. He left San Francisco on January 3rd, and went to visit his uncle Aram, as well as enjoying dinner at a Basque restaurant, possibly what is today Santa Fe Basque Restaurant and Bar. He visited with Ross, who was entering the Army the next night. He returned to San Francisco, and there began the serious writing of The Human Comedy, which took roughly 10 days. He had created a set of incredibly rich characters, one of which he would call his greatest creation. That creation was the Macaulay family. In the story, the father had died, and now their mother and 4 children had to navigate the world of Ithaca, California, struggling to make ends meet. This is a clear analog to Saroyan's own family, dead father and all, though there are two significant differences. The first is the time period. While there is some universality to the piece, it is clearly set during World War II. The second, and perhaps most striking difference, is that the Macaulays are not Armenian. This is an interesting note because Saroyan, arguably the most notable Armenian in American history up to that point, had spent much of his career writing about his Armenian roots. And with a family that is so clearly drawn from the form of his own, and a setting that is so clearly modeled on his own Fresno, you'd have expected it to be an Armenian family. Perhaps he wanted to bring attention to his ability to be more than just an Armenian writer, and create a non-Armenian family that could be seen for all audiences. Perhaps it is an internal comment to himself that the place in society for Armenians still would not allow them to penetrate as deeply into the American psyche. The fact that the Macaulay family seems to have Scotch-Irish roots also reflects something that Saroyan had been known to appreciate: the Irish. It is one of the things he admired about Eddie Mannix, in fact. He found that they were a people of heartiness. He went back and forth on the title of the book, mostly with Stanley Rose. An early contender was Ithaca, O Ithaca, or just O Ithaca. The Human Comedy was a reference to a massive and never-completed series of works by Honoré de Balzac, who derived the title from Dante's The Divine Comedy. It was supposed to represent the universality of human experience, though that wasn't quite Saroyan's jam. He was more about documenting people's lives as they happened, and while applying the idea of every man's experience to being universal, he was more often rooted in a time and place. There is little that could be further from Balzac's wide-ranging works or Dante's metaphysicality. Saroyan had written the Human Comedy not quite as a script, but as a treatment or scenario. The surviving drafts, one of which is in the collection of Forever Saroyan, show a piece that is clearly meant for the screen, but reads more like a novel with inserted script sections. A typical treatment usually ends up in the 120 to 150 page range. Saroyan's runs well more than 200 pages. A typical script might run 100 pages, with a page roughly equaling 1 minute of screen time. This likely would have been 150 to 175 pages, nearly 3 hours. Saroyan completed it and sent 2 copies, one to Stanley Rose, and the other to Arthur Freed. They both loved it. He returned from his holidays in San Francisco in early February to a meeting with Mayer, Free, Hyman, executive Sam Katz, and a few others. The meeting was very positive, and ended with Saroyan being assigned an actual office. This was an incredibly good sign, as the buzz around MGM was that Saroyan had written what was going to be MGM's next prestige picture. Saroyan himself thought that The Human Comedy was the finest story ever written for the screen, but he had not written the screenplay, only the scenario. He still planned on producing, writing, and directing the film, but for the moment he was riding high on the treatment, though somewhat uncharacteristically for Saroyan, he had some doubts. The whole day has been a contest for me. All worse out from boxing with the boys. L.B. Mayer, Bernie Hyman, Sam Katz, Arthur Freed, etc., etc. Really pooped. And what's more, a little curious as to whether it's worth all the trouble. From that meeting, Mayer apparently formulated his plan. On February 6, 1942, Mayer sent the initial contract. The deal Mayer offered to make the picture was fairly standard for a new writer. $50,000 for the script, and a writer, producer, and associate producer credit. This would not do for Saroyan, who came back with a letter on February 9th. You have been generous and patient with me, and I can only hope that you will continue to be. Because now I am ready to go to work, to stay at my job, and to being a member of your great organization. I sincerely believe that good things will come of my association with you, both for myself and for Metro-Goldwyn. He made a counteroffer. $75,000 up front, $1,500 a week while the movie was in production, another $25,000 when shooting started, and one last payment of $25,000 when the picture wrapped. There were various other requests, mostly about rights and credits. He wanted to be the only producer credited, and merely wanted William Saroyan's The Human Comedy to be the title card, with no further credits for producer, writer, or director, for himself or anyone else. This was highly unusual, and perhaps showed Saroyan's lack of understanding of the Hollywood business. The response to that from Mayer was $60,000 and $1,000 a week for 1 full year. Bill didn't love it, but in the end he accepted it, gave Stanley Rose $10,000 for being his agent, and then he called his mother and worked out a plan to distribute a bunch of money to the family. He was left with 10 large, not a windfall, but certainly enough to live on. Meyer set upon the task of building the team that would make The Human Comedy. Saroyan had hoped for the establishment of the Saroyan Unit, a team that would work exclusively on his projects. This was a luxury only afforded to a few in Hollywood, but Saroyan thought he was worth it. Meyer convened a meeting to create a plan to produce The Human Comedy. A number of big-name directors were put forward, but the biggest was King Vidor, already a legend in the industry. The man who had directed the most important silent film ever made, The Big Parade, and had also directed the black and white scenes of The Wizard of Oz. Meyer eventually settled on Vidor, and when he presented that to Saroyan, Bill said that he himself was the only man who could direct his vision, and if they didn't hire him, he would leave town. Eddie Mannix laughed at the very idea. Mayer wasn't sure that Bill was up to the task. This was going to be a prestige picture, after all. It needed a steady hand at the wheel. It was proposed that Bill should direct a short film that would serve as his bid to direct the major feature. Bill liked the idea and chose one of his stories, A Number of the Poor, as the basis for it. Bill, wanting a little more money, tried to get MGM to buy the rights to A Number of the Poor, but Eddie Mannix said that he would donate the story instead, or they'd just call the whole thing off. This infuriated Saroyan, and though he had no choice but to give in, he dedicated himself to getting even. This was the setup for the first of Saroyan's produced works, The Good Job, which is where we'll pick up on our next episode. Thank you for listening to Saroyan on Screen. I'm Chris Garcia. Check the show notes for links to some of the important matters that we found, and a look at the treatment that Saroyan actually produced. Thank you for listening. I'm Chris Garcia.